He didn't remember the exact moment things started going wrong. Only that one day, the house felt different. Quieter, not peaceful, just empty. He sat alone at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold, staring at the same spot on the wall where a family photo used to hang. He couldn't remember when it was taken down. Maybe he did. Maybe he just didn't want to. Some losses don't announce themselves. They settle in slowly, like dust, until one day you realize you're breathing them in. At 52, he had learned how to look functional. That was his greatest skill. He woke up early, paid the bills, most of them, drove the same car, said the right things at dinner. From the outside, nothing screamed collapse. That's how it usually happens. People imagine ruin as something loud, screaming matches, doors slammed, a dramatic exit. But real damage prefers silence. It works better that way. He picked up his phone. No messages. He wasn't surprised. His wife used to text him in the mornings. Nothing special, just small reminders, groceries, appointments, a simple "don't forget." She stopped doing that months ago. He told himself it was normal. People get busy, people change, relationships evolve. That's what he said out loud anyway. What he didn't say was that every silence felt like a verdict. The house still smelled like her perfume, faint but persistent, trapped in the curtains and the couch cushions. Some mornings that scent was the only proof that a family still lived there, or used to. He stood up, rinsed the mug, and placed it carefully in the sink. He always did things carefully now, as if moving too fast might cause something else to break. In the hallway, his jacket hung exactly where it had been for years. Black, simple, the same one he wore almost every day. He slipped it on, checking the pockets without thinking. Keys, wallet, nothing else. He paused, then checked again. There it was, a folded slip of paper. He didn't unfold it right away. He already knew what it was. He could feel it between his fingers, thin and fragile, like it might disappear if he acknowledged it too directly. Some people pray before they make a bad decision. Others pretend it's already been made. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. Not long enough to reflect, just long enough to delay. This was supposed to be the last time. It always is. He told himself he wasn't chasing money anymore. That phase had passed. This wasn't about winning big or changing his life. It was about correcting something, balancing the scale, fixing what had tilted the wrong way years ago. That's how it starts for men like him, not with greed, with correction. He had once been good with numbers, careful, responsible, the kind of man people trusted with decisions. Somewhere along the line, probability started feeling personal, like the universe owed him one, and he was patient, very patient. He folded the paper again, tucking it deeper into his pocket, and walked out the door. The street was already awake. Cars passed. Neighbors walked dogs. Someone laughed across the road. Life continued at a pace that felt almost offensive. No one noticed him leave. That was the problem. At the corner, he hesitated. Left would take him straight to work. Right would add only 10 minutes, maybe 15. No one would know. No one ever did. He turned right. The building didn't look dangerous. That's what made it worse. Clean windows, neutral colors, no flashing lights, no warning signs. Just a place where hope was quietly exchanged for regret, one transaction at a time. Inside, the air felt heavier. Not smoky, not dark, just thick, like too many thoughts had been left behind and never picked up. He nodded to no one in particular and took his usual seat. Same corner, same angle. He liked consistency. It made the outcome feel manageable. The paper came out of his pocket slowly now, carefully, like a fragile agreement. This wasn't about excitement. His hands didn't shake. His heart didn't race. He felt calm. That scared him more than anything else. He remembered the first time he'd said, "Just this once." That was years ago, back when his daughter still waited up for him on weekends. Back when his wife still asked how his day had been, and actually listened to the answer. Back when promises still meant something. He signed where he was supposed to sign. Some bets don't cost money, they cost people. He stood up before the result even mattered. He always did. Waiting felt dishonest, like watching something die slowly instead of stepping away. Outside, the sky had shifted. Clouds rolled in, dulling the morning light. It felt appropriate. His phone buzzed as he reached the car. One message. For a moment, hope flared, sharp and stupid. Then he read it. "We need to talk tonight." Nothing else. No emoji, no softness, no explanation. He sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, staring at the words until they blurred. He called it hope. His family would have called it the end. The engine finally turned over and he drove away, not knowing which loss would reach him first. Money had rules. Families don't. And this wasn't about luck anymore. He arrived home before the sun went down. That used to mean something. Years ago, it meant dinner was still warm, voices filled the kitchen, and the television played in the background without anyone really watching it. Now it only meant there was more time to sit with the silence. The house greeted him the same way it always did, without resistance. He placed his keys on the counter, lined up perfectly beside the mail. He liked order. Order made it easier to pretend things were under control. The envelope on top of the pile wasn't his. The handwriting was careful, familiar. He didn't open it. Not yet. Some truths lose their power if you delay them long enough. He moved through the living room slowly, noticing details he usually ignored. A small crack in the wall near the window. A dent in the coffee table from the night he'd come home late and pretended not to notice her waiting on the couch. That night had ended without a fight. That had been worse. Upstairs, the bedroom door was half open. He stopped there, hand resting on the frame. Inside, the room felt colder than the rest of the house. Or maybe that was just him. Her side of the bed was made, too neatly. He sat on the edge of the mattress, careful not to disturb it, like the space itself belonged to someone else now. On the nightstand, her phone charger was gone. She used to forget it everywhere. The fact that she remembered this time felt deliberate, intentional. He tried to remember when the conversations had changed, not the big ones. Those are easy to recall. The arguments, the accusations, the apologies. What he struggled to remember were the small moments, the ones that slipped through unnoticed. When she stopped asking where he'd been, when she stopped getting angry, when disappointment replaced expectation. Those were the real turning points. Downstairs, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway cut through his thoughts. He stood quickly, smoothing his jacket like a reflex. The front door opened, then closed. Footsteps, measured, controlled. She entered the kitchen without looking at him at first, placing her purse down and exhaling slowly, as if bracing herself. "Dinner's in the fridge," she said. No greeting, no question, just information. He nodded, even though she wasn't looking. "I'm not hungry." That used to start an argument. Tonight, it didn't. She finally turned toward him then, and for a brief second, their eyes met. There was no anger there, no tears either. Just something tired, final. He recognized that look. He'd worn it himself once, back when he still believed walking away was the hardest thing someone could do. He was wrong. Staying had cost more. She picked up the envelope from the counter, weighing it in her hand before sliding it back toward him. "You should read that." Her voice was steady. That was new. He watched her fingers linger on the edge of the paper for a moment longer than necessary, like she was making sure he understood its importance. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I call it." That hurt more than if she'd named it. He waited until she left the room before opening it. Inside were numbers, dates, bank statements he thought he'd hidden well enough, patterns he'd convinced himself didn't exist. Seeing them laid out so cleanly felt like looking at a version of himself he no longer recognized. Or maybe one he'd always known was there. She had done her homework. He sat down slowly, the chair creaking under his weight. For a moment, he imagined explaining it, rationalizing, telling her it wasn't as bad as it looked. It never is, until it is. When she came back, she didn't ask for an explanation. That was the moment he knew. "I'm not angry," she said quietly. "I just don't trust you anymore." The words landed without drama. No raised voice, no tears, just truth. Trust, once broken, doesn't shatter. It erodes, slowly, completely. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Apologies felt cheap now. Promises even more so. He had used all of them already. She picked up her purse again. "I'll be staying with my sister tonight." He nodded. Of course she would. At the door she paused, her hand on the handle. "You always say it's the last time." She didn't turn around when she said it. "I think the problem is, I stopped believing you." The door closed behind her with a sound that wasn't loud, but final. He stayed where he was, long after she left. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt hollow. He pulled the folded slip of paper from his pocket again, smoothing it out on the table. Numbers stared back at him, indifferent. The universe doesn't keep score, people do. And tonight, the cost was finally clear. The house settled into a different kind of quiet that night. Not the kind you get when everyone is asleep. The kind that waits. He didn't turn on the television. Didn't reach for his phone. He sat at the kitchen table long enough for the light above him to feel harsh, then stood and turned it off, leaving only the dim glow from the hallway. Darkness felt more honest. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at it like it might say something back. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He had expected shaking, panic, something dramatic enough to justify what he felt inside. Instead, there was clarity. That scared him. Clarity meant there were no more excuses left. He walked into the living room and sat in the armchair closest to the window. From there, he could see the streetlights come on one by one. Each light felt like a marker, a reminder that time kept moving whether he was ready or not. The photo album was still on the bottom shelf of the bookcase. He hadn't touched it in years. He told himself it was because there was no time. The truth was simpler. Memories were expensive. He pulled it out anyway. The first picture showed all three of them standing in front of a cheap restaurant, smiling too wide, arms around each other like they were afraid of drifting apart. His daughter couldn't have been more than 12. Her hair was longer then, her smile less guarded. Back when she still believed he was exactly who he said he was. He flipped through slowly. Birthday candles, a school play, a blurry photo taken too late at night, her asleep on his shoulder. He remembered that night clearly. She had waited up for him. He'd promised he wouldn't be long. He always did. He had been late. Again. The memory didn't hurt because it was dramatic. It hurt because it was ordinary. Because it had happened so many times it no longer felt like a mistake, just a pattern. Patterns are harder to forgive. His phone buzzed on the table. One notification, not from his wife. He didn't need to look to know who it was from. His daughter rarely texted him anymore. When she did, the messages were short, polite, like she was talking to someone she used to know. He picked up the phone anyway. "Mom said you're home." That was it. No question mark. No follow-up. He stared at the words longer than necessary, his thumb hovering over the screen. What do you say when you've already said everything wrong? "I'm sorry," had lost its meaning. "I'll fix it," sounded like a joke. He typed, deleted, typed again. "Yeah, I am." Send. The response came almost immediately. "I won't be late tonight." That one line hit harder than anything his wife had said. It wasn't anger. It was distance. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that as long as he kept showing up eventually, it would count for something. But children don't measure love in totals. They measure it in moments. Miss enough of those, and the math stops working. He stood and walked to the front door, resting his forehead against the cool wood for a moment. Outside, a car passed, headlights briefly cutting across the window. Life continued, indifferent to his internal reckoning. He wondered when the house had stopped feeling like home and started feeling like evidence. Back at the table, the folded slip of paper waited where he'd left it earlier. It looked smaller now, less important, or maybe everything else had just grown heavier. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing it flat, even though there was nothing left to smooth. Numbers, lines, probabilities that promised order in a world that had slipped beyond it. This time, he didn't tell himself it would fix anything. This time, he told himself it would end something. Sometimes, that's enough. He folded the paper once more and slipped it into his jacket pocket, the fabric familiar against his fingers. He stood there for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing evenly, not praying, preparing. Upstairs, his phone buzzed again. Another message from his daughter. He didn't read it. Not yet. Some choices demand silence first. He stood at the bottom of the stairs longer than necessary. The house felt different now. Not hollow, not quiet, but expectant. Like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of man he would be when the night was over. He climbed the steps slowly, each one familiar under his feet. Halfway up, he stopped and listened. Nothing, no voices, no movement, no chance to hide behind distraction. In the bedroom, the lamp on his side of the bed was still on. He didn't remember turning it on. Maybe he hadn't turned it off the night before. Details like that used to bother him. Now they just felt symbolic. He sat on the edge of the mattress again, the same place he had earlier, and finally picked up his phone. The message from his daughter was still there, waiting. He read it this time. "I just want to know if you're okay." That was all. No accusation, no lecture, no disappointment spelled out, just concern. It hit him harder than anger ever could. He stared at the words until his eyes burned. Somewhere along the way, he had confused absence with invisibility. He thought if he stayed quiet enough, the damage would stay small. He had been wrong. Damage doesn't need attention to grow. It only needs time. He typed a response slowly, deliberately. "I'm home." He paused, deleted it, typed again. "I made mistakes." Deleted. The truth felt too big for a screen, too heavy for a message that would disappear with a swipe. He locked the phone and set it face down on the nightstand. Some conversations can't happen digitally. He stood and walked to the closet, opening it wider than necessary. Clothes hung neatly, untouched. His wife had always kept things orderly, even when everything else was falling apart. He reached for the black jacket again. Same weight, same feel. The pocket brushed against his hand, and for a moment, his fingers hesitated. The folded slip of paper was still there, exactly where he'd left it. This was the part no one talks about, the moment between knowing and doing, where the past and future both feel close enough to touch. He took the paper out and unfolded it on the bed. Under the soft bedroom light, it looked smaller than before. Less powerful. Ridiculous even. He sat there, staring at it, and for the first time that day, something shifted. Not fear, not hope. Regret. Not loud regret. Not cinematic regret. The quiet kind that settles deep and doesn't leave. He imagined his daughter waiting up, pretending not to care. He imagined his wife lying awake somewhere else, replaying years of promises she had finally stopped believing. He imagined himself 10 years from now, telling the same story to no one who wanted to hear it. He folded the paper again, but this time he didn't put it back in his pocket. He set it on the nightstand beside the phone. 2 objects, 2 choices, neither one simple. He exhaled slowly, pressing his palms into his knees. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened mirror across the room. Older than he felt, tired in ways sleep couldn't fix. He didn't recognize himself anymore. That realization hurt more than losing money ever had. Downstairs, the clock chimed softly. He checked the time. If he left now, no one would know. If he stayed, everything would change. Change had always scared him more than loss. He stood up, walking toward the door, then stopped halfway. His hand hovered over the handle, muscles tense, like he was waiting for permission he knew wouldn't come. He thought of the first time he'd said, "This is the last bet." He had believed it then. Belief wasn't the problem. Action was. He turned back toward the bed, picked up the phone, picked up the paper, and for the first time all night, he didn't know which one felt heavier. He stood there for a long moment, holding both objects in his hands. The phone was warm from his grip. The folded paper was thin, almost weightless, and yet one of them carried the gravity of years. He placed the paper back on the nightstand first. Not gently, not angrily. Decisively. The phone remained in his hand. His thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating again. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because saying anything meant stepping into a version of himself he'd avoided for too long. He unlocked the screen. No new messages, just the last one from his daughter, waiting quietly. He sat down, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the words might arrange themselves without his help. They didn't. They never do. He typed slowly this time, not editing, not correcting. "I'm not okay." He paused, then added, "But I want to be." His thumb hovered again. Sending it felt like admitting weakness. And for most of his life, weakness had been the one thing he believed he couldn't afford. He hit send anyway. The response didn't come immediately. That was new. Usually things moved fast in his world. Numbers, outcomes, wins, losses. This felt different. This felt like waiting without leverage. He stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The street was almost empty now. A single car passed, headlights briefly illuminating the inside of the room before disappearing again. He wondered how many nights he'd spent chasing certainty in places that thrived on chaos. The phone buzzed. He didn't check it right away. He inhaled slowly, exhaled, grounded himself in the feeling of the floor beneath his feet. Then he looked. "Okay," his daughter had written. "That's a start." 2 sentences. No forgiveness, no resolution, but something else. An opening. He felt his chest tighten, not with panic this time, but with something unfamiliar. Responsibility. The real kind. The kind you can't gamble away. He sat back down on the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. His eyes drifted to the nightstand again. The folded paper waited there, patient, indifferent. For years it had offered him the same thing, an escape disguised as opportunity, a shortcut that promised to fix what only honesty could repair. He picked it up once more, held it, and then, slowly, tore it in half. The sound was small, barely audible, but it echoed louder than any wind he'd ever chased. He didn't stop there. He tore it again, and again, until the pieces were small enough to scatter, meaningless fragments of a promise that no longer had power over him. He let them fall into the trash without ceremony. No triumph, no relief, just acceptance. He sat there for a while after that, hands resting on his thighs, breathing evenly. The house didn't feel fixed. Nothing was suddenly better, but something was different. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running toward hope or away from shame. He was staying. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from his wife. "I heard you're home." He read it twice, then once more. He didn't respond right away. Some conversations deserve to be spoken, not typed. He placed the phone face down beside him, turned off the lamp, and lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling as the darkness settled in. Tomorrow wouldn't be easier, but tonight at least he had chosen not to disappear, and for a man who had spent years betting on silence, that might have been the bravest move of all. Morning came without ceremony. No dramatic light, no revelation. Just the soft gray of a day beginning whether anyone was ready for it or not. He woke up on the same bed, in the same house, with the same problems waiting patiently for him downstairs. For a moment, he stayed still, listening. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face with both hands. The night before returned in fragments. The message, the torn paper, the choice. None of it felt heroic in the morning light. That felt right. Real change rarely announces itself. He walked into the kitchen barefoot, the cold floor grounding him. On the counter, the trash bin sat where he'd left it. He looked inside. Small pieces of paper, torn edges, meaningless now. He didn't smile. He just nodded to himself once. as if acknowledging something that didn't need celebration. The coffee maker hummed to life. He poured a cup and took a slow sip, grimacing slightly at the bitterness. He didn't add sugar. He hadn't earned sweetness yet. Outside, the neighborhood moved through its routines. A man jogged past. Someone loaded groceries into a car. Ordinary moments stacked on top of each other, indifferent to personal redemption arcs. That was comforting. His phone buzzed on the counter. He didn't jump this time. He picked it up calmly. A message from his wife. "I'll come by later. We should talk." No anger, no warmth, just reality. He typed back a single word, "Okay," and meant it. He stood there for a moment longer, hands resting on the counter, breathing evenly. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was forgiven. Nothing was guaranteed. But the cycle had been interrupted. For the first time in years, he hadn't placed a bet. He had made a choice. And sometimes, that's where redemption begins.